So now that we can serve static files in our App Engine applications, we're going to explore a little bit more what we can do with them. And we're going to start with HTML. So what is HTML? Well, HTML is hypertext markup language. So H is for hyper, T is for text, M is for markup, L is for language. And what that means is, markup language is just some type of special information you're providing about, formatting a presentation about the language. And then hypertext is just, beyond text. I don't know. HTML is basically just the way you identify the content and the structure, maybe some formatting for your web pages, which is actually really interesting because way back in the early days of the internet, we used to do pretty much all of our formatting in HTML, but the whole system has evolved quite a bit. So HTML consists of tags or elements. I've heard a lot of people call them HTML tags. I've heard a lot of people call them HTML elements. I don't know if this is as controversial of a programmer war as tabs versus spaces, but ultimately you can call them either one. It's fine. And I'll probably use the two terms interchangeably. I'll try to use elements, but even here you can see I'm already saying tags. So it's hard to be consistent on this kind of thing because I don't know that one terminology is sort of generally accepted. So some tags, like the body tag, they're used to open and close sections of your document. Others, like the BR tag, which is for line breaks, are just used individually. So there is a language called, or a language structure called XML, Extensible Markup Language, where everything either has to be an open and close or it has to be identified as a single tag. XML and HTML both have the same sort of parent, which is a language called Standard Generalized Markup Language. They kind of work similarly, though they're a little bit different. White space in HTML is compressed, so if you have 1,000 blank lines, it looks like just one space. And if you have 1,000 blank spaces, it looks like just one space. So that can be frustrating the first couple of times you try to format anything using text, because if you don't know about paragraph tags and you don't know about line break tags, or you don't know about div tags, then all of those things can be, they can provide separation and spacing, but without them, you might just kind of feel stuck. You keep putting spaces in and they don't show up. One other thing is that the ampersand is an escape character, and it's used to identify, a lot of different special characters. So ampersand, there are a couple of codes that you can use, like ampersand AMP semicolon is the escape character, is the character for ampersand. So if you want to, in generally speaking, most browsers are going to show the ampersand normally if you're not using it as an escape character, but it's generally good practice to use the ampersand, to identify some of these other things. So the first version of HTML way back in 1991, and like I said, was based on Standard Generalized Markup Language. And then 4 years later, in 1995, the HTML2 definition was released. And this evolved a little bit over the next couple of years to get to HTML 4.01. This recommendation was released, and it was kind of the standard for a good bit of years. And this is a challenge with HTML, because what you actually found was that, in the early days of the internet, way back in the 90s and into the 2000s, browser compatibility was a challenge, because you'd create a feature in your browser that would allow you to take advantage of some HTML tag, but maybe not all the other browsers supported that, or maybe they supported it in a different way. So this sort of standard recommendation was published in '99, but it didn't really, there was nothing really binding any of the companies building browsers to hold to it perfectly. So you sort of ended up with things like doing rounded corners in a table had to be done 3 or 4 different ways, and having different approaches to formatting maybe had to be done 2 or 3 different ways. The early days of the internet, it was kind of a challenge, just spending a lot of time making sure that you worked for Netscape, and that your code worked for Internet Explorer, and that your code worked for Opera, or any other browsers that came out. And more and more browsers were coming out at that time, and it wasn't until probably 2010 or so when this became a much simpler thing to do. The HTML5 recommendation was released by the W3 consortium in 2014. So after HTML5, things sort of converged a bit more, and it was a little bit easier to produce code that didn't have to be, didn't have to be validated across a dozen different browsers and versions over and over again. After HTML5, things got a little bit simpler. So HTML is generally used to specify formatting and sort of layout. So there are also semantic tags that allow you to kind of define what kind of content you have on your page. That's a lot more common over the last few years as well. So in HTML, you typically have three elements that will that define your document. HTML is the element that it pretty much defines everything within your document, and then you have a head tag, which is where you're going to put things like any scripts that you need to define, style sheets, any meta tags, anything like that, and then your body, which is going to be the content that's actually displayed to the user. Now you might also see these doc type HTML. This is probably not necessary, but I believe it's good practice for HTML5, so you might see that at the top as well. Some common elements that you might encounter. Title usually goes in head, and this is where you can define the title for your document. That's what's going to be shown on the tab when you're using that in a browser. You have different heading tags, H1, H2, H3, H4, H5, H6. These are all HTML headings, and they'll be rendered by, typically default larger text or smaller text in your browser. You have the P tag, which separates paragraphs. You have the B tag or strong, which represents bold text, typically. B and I were used very commonly earlier in HTML, but typically nowadays you see strong and EM for the italics and the bold as well. So, strong for bold and EM for italic text. Code is an element that you can use to identify computer code. Usually that's formatted in monospace, so it's a good way to see what's out there. And then if you're presenting code that has things like spaces for formatting or tabs for formatting. And then BR is the line break. So this is an individual element. It doesn't have a starting and ending element. The BR element just kind of exists on its own. So after this, we're going to get into a walkthrough of different things we can do in HTML. This is going to give you a couple of examples of some different content that you can build. But for now, thanks for watching.